The Galactic Forum was a marvel of interstellar cooperation, a sprawling space station glittering with lights, suspended against the black void of space. It served as the diplomatic heart of the galaxy, where disputes were resolved without bloodshed, trade agreements forged alliances, and ancient rivalries were smoothed over by the relentless pursuit of peace. To many species, war was seen as an antiquated relic of a violent past. The concept of war crimes was something most in attendance could barely comprehend. For humanity, this was a new and intimidating stage. Barely a century had passed since humanity joined the galactic community, and they were still considered untested, a curiosity rather than a powerhouse. Representatives of species like the mighty Zlekries, with their towering forms and advanced neural networks, or the Trezor Collective, crystalline beings who claimed to have achieved enlightenment millennia ago, viewed humans as physically weak and technologically mediocre. Still, humans had managed to garner some goodwill. Their adaptability and diplomacy had proven valuable in minor trade disputes, and their willingness to work within the Federation's strict protocols painted them as cooperative, harmless, even. Harmless was a word Sergeant Jack Callahan despised. Jack, a Marine with years of battlefield experience, stood silently behind Ambassador Lin, his crisp uniform marking him as a mere security advisor. But his watchful eyes and tense posture betrayed a readiness that set him apart from the rest of the humans in the room. Jack wasn't here for pleasantries. He was here in case the galaxy's so-called peacekeepers showed their teeth. The ambassador spoke in soothing tones, addressing the issue at hand. The Kroshal, a brutal species infamous for raiding neutral planets and enslaving weaker civilizations. The Federation was debating how to handle the growing threat. As the discussion dragged on, an 8-limbed diplomat from the Zlekries delegation leaned forward, his voice a rumble of disdain. "Humans," he said, his glowing eyes narrowing, "you are a species with little history in galactic matters. What insight could you possibly offer in dealing with aggressors?" Ambassador Lin hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Our history may be short compared to yours, but we have faced similar challenges. Perhaps you would enlighten us," the Zlekries interrupted, "on how your primitive species overcame such situations." Jack's lips twitched into the ghost of a smirk. He took a step forward, his boots clicking on the polished floor. "Sure," he said, his voice cutting through the room. "Want to know how humans deal with aggressors? We call it war crimes." A ripple of confusion spread across the room. Delegates exchanged puzzled glances, their translators struggling to parse the phrase. "War crimes?" a crystalline delegate from the Trezor Collective asked, their chiming voice betraying curiosity. "Is this some form of negotiation tactic?" Jack chuckled darkly. "Not quite." Ambassador Lin shot him a warning glance, but it was too late. The Marine was in his element. "You see," Jack began, stepping forward, "humans are a cooperative bunch, until someone crosses the line. And when that happens, we have rules for war. Rules to keep things civilized. But when someone breaks those rules, we don't just fight back. We escalate." "Escalate," repeated a reptilian delegate, her scaled brow furrowing. Jack nodded. "We fight smarter, harder, and nastier. And when the dust settles, we make sure whoever crossed the line knows they screwed up. Permanently." The room was silent, save for the hum of the station systems. The alien delegates, many of whom had never known war beyond ritualized combat or ancient myths, struggled to process what they'd just heard. The Zlekries diplomat scoffed, his mandibles clicking. "And yet you call yourselves peaceful? You claim to adhere to rules even in conflict, yet you escalate when it suits you." Jack met his gaze without flinching. "We're peaceful," he said evenly. "But peace doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes, you have to fight to protect what matters. And when we fight, we don't lose." Ambassador Lin stepped in, her tone measured but firm. "Sergeant Callahan's experiences reflect humanity's turbulent history. We hope the Federation will consider this perspective when addressing the Kroshal threat." The Zlekries waved a dismissive limb. "Your violent methods are unnecessary. The Kroshal are raiders, not strategists. They can be deterred through economic sanctions and diplomatic efforts." Jack bit back a retort, his jaw tightening. He'd seen what happened when aggressors were underestimated. This wasn't the first time someone had dismissed humanity's warnings, and he doubted it would be the last. As the meeting adjourned, Jack lingered near the windows, watching the swirling starfield outside. He could feel the weight of the alien stares on his back, a mix of curiosity and unease. They still thought humans were harmless. "They'll learn," Jack muttered to himself. One way or another. The corridors of the Galactic Forum hummed with activity. Delegates and staff moved between chambers, oblivious to the brewing storm. Jack Callahan leaned against a railing overlooking the station's central atrium, his arms crossed and his gaze sharp. The meeting earlier had left a bitter taste in his mouth. These aliens, with their centuries of peace and ritualized combat, couldn't fathom the reality of unchecked aggression. Their ignorance was dangerous, especially with the Kroshal looming closer to Federation space. His thoughts were interrupted by the soft clinking sound of crystalline limbs. A delegate from the Trezor Collective, its translucent body refracting light into rainbows, approached him. Sergeant Callahan, the Trezor said, its voice a delicate chime. You mentioned escalation. This concept intrigues us. Would you explain further? Jack glanced at the delegate, surprised by its directness. Escalation means responding to a threat with greater force, he said simply. It's about sending a message. If you hit us, we'll hit back harder. The Trezor tilted its head, the crystals on its body shifting color. And these war crimes you mentioned? Are they your method of escalation? Jack sighed. Not exactly. War crimes are what happens when someone crosses a line, targeting civilians, using banned weapons, stuff like that. When someone plays dirty, we respond in kind, but smarter. It's not just about survival, it's about making sure they never want to fight us again. The Trezor paused, its shimmering body vibrating slightly. Such tactics seem excessive. Is there no alternative to such violence? Jack's gaze hardened. Sometimes there isn't. Let me tell you a story. The Trezor listened attentively as Jack recounted a tale from Earth's history. Back on Earth, during World War II, there was an enemy that didn't follow the rules. They targeted civilians, used fear as a weapon, and didn't care about the cost. The world tried diplomacy, sanctions, and appeals to their better nature. None of it worked. So we got creative. We didn't just fight them on the battlefield. We broke their supply chains, crippled their economy, and used deception to turn their own people against them. And when the war was over, we put their leaders on trial for what they did. But here's the thing, we also learned from them. We took their tactics, refined them, and made sure no one could ever use those tricks against us again. The Trezor's body dimmed, its refracted light dulling. You adapted to their atrocities? Jack nodded. We had to. You can't reason with someone who's willing to burn everything down to get what they want. The only way to stop them is to make them fear the consequences. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion in the atrium below. A group of Federation security officers was escorting a delegation of Kroshal representatives. The Kroshal were massive, insectoid creatures with armored exoskeletons and cruel predatory eyes. Their movements were deliberate, exuding an air of arrogance as they surveyed their surroundings. Jack tensed at the sight of them. Speak of the devil. The Trezor observed the Kroshal with a mix of curiosity and unease. Their aggression is undeniable. But surely the Federation can manage them without resorting to escalation. Jack turned to the Trezor, his expression grim. You think diplomacy works with slavers? The Kroshal don't negotiate, they exploit. They don't respect laws or treaties. The only thing they respect is strength. Below, the Kroshal delegation paused, their leader, a towering figure with serrated limbs, turning its head upward. Its piercing gaze locked with Jack's for a brief moment. The Marine didn't flinch, meeting the alien's stare with cold defiance. The Trezor vibrated softly, a gesture of unease. You believe they will escalate? Jack smirked, his voice low. No. They'll go straight for the kill. And when they do, we'll be ready. The next day, the Kroshal made their move. A neutral trade station just outside Federation-controlled space was attacked, its defenses overwhelmed in minutes. The Kroshal raiders enslaved the station's inhabitants and looted its resources. The news hit the Galactic Forum like a thunderclap. Emergency sessions were called, delegates scrambling to draft a response. But as debates raged over sanctions and diplomatic measures, Jack knew it was already too late. Ambassador Lin sought him out in the security quarters. Jack, the Federation's hands are tied. They won't authorize a military response without unanimous approval. Jack shook his head, frustration boiling under his calm demeanor. Unanimous approval? That'll take weeks. By then, the Kroshal will have stripped that station clean and moved on to the next target. Lin hesitated. What do you propose? Jack's jaw tightened. Let me handle it. Give me a team and a ship. We'll deal with the Kroshal. Lin frowned. Jack, if you go in without authorization, the Federation could sanction us. It could jeopardize everything we've worked for. Diplomacy only works if the other side plays by the rules, Jack said. The Kroshal don't. And if the Federation won't protect its own, humanity will. Lin studied him for a long moment before nodding. Do what you have to do. As Jack prepared for the mission, he couldn't help but think back to the Zlekri's diplomats' dismissive words. Harmless, they had called humans. By the time the Kroshal learned the truth, it would be too late. The stars blurred past the human corvette as it sped toward the neutral trade station under Kroshal control. Inside the sleek ship, Sergeant Jack Callahan reviewed the tactical data with his team of Marines, a hand-picked group of Earth's finest. Each of them had seen combat before, and their faces bore the hardened expressions of soldiers who understood the cost of war. The mission was clear: neutralize the Kroshal raiders, secure the station, and rescue any surviving hostages. But Callahan had no illusions. This wasn't going to be clean or easy. As the ship approached the station, they intercepted Kroshal communications. Their guttural language translated into crude boasts of victory and conquest. They're celebrating already, one of Callahan's team muttered. Callahan's lips curled into a grim smile. Good. Complacency makes them sloppy. Let's show them why that's a mistake. The station loomed ahead, its once bustling corridors now silent under Kroshal occupation. Callahan's team docked the corvette at an emergency airlock, bypassing the main hangar to avoid detection. The Marines moved quickly and silently, their weapons ready. Inside, the station was a wreck. Debris littered the halls, and the air carried the acrid stench of burnt metal and blood. The Kroshal had left their mark, and it wasn't subtle. Callahan signaled his team to split into two groups. Team Alpha, secure the hostages. Team Bravo, come with me. We're going after their command center. As they advanced, they encountered their first Kroshal patrol. The towering insectoid creatures were armed with jagged blades and plasma rifles, their exoskeletons gleaming under the station's flickering lights. The Marines struck first. Suppressed weapons barked softly, precision shots finding weak points in the Kroshal armor. The aliens fell quickly, their grotesque forms collapsing to the ground. Move, Callahan ordered, his voice calm but commanding. In the lower levels, Team Alpha found the hostages, terrified civilians huddled in a cargo hold, guarded by several Kroshal. The Marines coordinated a flawless ambush, eliminating the guards before they could sound an alarm. One of the rescued civilians, a trembling woman clutching a small child, whispered, "We thought no one would come." "We're here now," a Marine replied, helping her to her feet. "Stay quiet and follow us. You're going to be okay." Meanwhile, Callahan and Team Bravo reached the command center. The Kroshal leader, a massive figure with serrated limbs and a crown-like crest on its head, stood at the center of the room, issuing orders to its subordinates. Callahan observed the scene from the shadows, his mind racing. The Kroshal were organized and disciplined, but they relied on brute strength and intimidation. Against humans, that wasn't enough. "Set charges on the main console," Callahan whispered to one of his engineers. "We're taking out their communications first." As the Marine worked, a Kroshal patrol entered the room. Callahan acted fast, firing a shot that took down the nearest alien. Chaos erupted. The Kroshal leader bellowed orders, but Callahan's team moved with ruthless efficiency. They used the environment to their advantage, luring the Kroshal into choke points and exploiting their lack of maneuverability. The leader turned its attention to Callahan, its blade-like limbs slashing through the air as it charged. Callahan dodged, his movements precise, and retaliated with a burst from his rifle. The round struck true, cracking the creature's armor and forcing it back. As the Kroshal leader stumbled, Callahan closed the distance. He drew his combat knife and plunged it into a vulnerable joint between the alien's armored plates. The creature let out a final, guttural scream before collapsing. "Command neutralized," Callahan said into his comm. "Charges set. Let's wrap this up." The Marines regrouped with the hostages and retreated to the corvette just as the charges detonated. Explosions rippled through the station, severing Kroshal communications and throwing their remaining forces into disarray. As the corvette sped away, the station behind them was left a smoking ruin. The Kroshal were alive but crippled, their power shattered. Callahan stood in the cockpit, watching the wreckage fade into the distance. One of his Marines approached. "Do you think they'll come back?" Callahan's gaze was steely. "Not for a long time. And if they do, they'll remember what we did here." When the team returned to the Galactic Forum, the Federation was in an uproar. Diplomats condemned humanity's unilateral action, accusing them of violating protocol and endangering galactic peace. Ambassador Lin stood in the center of the forum, her voice steady as she defended the mission. The Kroshal attacked innocent civilians, and no one else acted. Humanity stepped in when it was needed. "We will not apologize for protecting the defenseless." The Zlekri's diplomats sneered. "You call this protection? You escalated the conflict and risked war." Callahan, standing silently behind Lin, finally spoke. "We didn't risk war. We ended it. The Kroshal only understand strength, and we showed them what happens when they push too far." The room fell silent. For the first time, the alien delegates began to understand the truth about humanity. They weren't the fragile, harmless species they'd thought. Humanity had the capacity for violence, but it was violence wielded with purpose. The Kroshal would think twice before crossing humanity, or the Federation, again. The Galactic Forum was silent, an unusual tension gripping the hall. The Kroshal's retreat, driven by the actions of a single human team, had sent shockwaves across the galaxy. The Federation's carefully maintained protocols of non-escalation and diplomacy had been shattered by a species the other delegates had thought to be harmless. Ambassador Lin stood at the podium, her posture unwavering as she addressed the assembled delegates. The events at the neutral trade station serve as a reminder that diplomacy is only effective when both sides respect its boundaries. When those boundaries are crossed, action becomes necessary. The Zlekri's diplomat rose, its towering form and glowing eyes radiating disdain. "Action? You mean barbarism. Humanity has shown itself to be reckless and dangerous, willing to plunge the galaxy into chaos to satisfy its primitive instincts." Sergeant Callahan, standing silently behind Lin, clenched his jaw but remained silent. His presence alone was enough to draw the eyes of several delegates, their expressions a mix of unease and curiosity. Lin responded calmly. "If humanity's actions were reckless, why did the Kroshal flee? Why have they issued no retaliation, no threats of further violence? Because they learned a lesson this forum has yet to understand." The crystalline Trezor delegate chimed in, its soft tones echoing through the chamber. "And what lesson is that, Ambassador Lin?" Callahan stepped forward, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. "That we don't fight wars to play fair. We fight wars to win. And when someone like the Kroshal breaks the rules, we don't just respond. We make sure they regret it." The aftermath. The Kroshal didn't respond to the Federation's inquiries. Their forces retreated deeper into unregulated space, licking their wounds and avoiding further engagement with Federation territories. Reports from neutral traders spoke of whispers among the Kroshal, a newfound fear of humans, whom they now referred to as the Vengeful. Despite the Kroshal's silence, the Federation wasn't entirely pleased with humanity. Sanctions were discussed, and debates raged over whether humanity's actions had endangered the precarious balance of peace. Ambassador Lin worked tirelessly to defend Earth's place in the Federation. "We acted because no one else would," she argued in countless sessions. "We showed the Kroshal that the Federation isn't a soft target. If you call that barbaric, then perhaps you should reconsider who truly endangers peace." Callahan remained a controversial figure. Some delegates viewed him as a dangerous relic of a violent past, while others saw him as a necessary protector in a galaxy growing increasingly uncertain. A visit from the Zlekris. Weeks later, Callahan found himself standing in one of the forum's observation decks, the endless expanse of stars stretching before him. He wasn't a diplomat or politician, and the constant debates wore on his patience. Yet he stayed, knowing his presence served as a reminder of humanity's resolve. The Zlekri's diplomat approached, its imposing form casting a long shadow. Callahan didn't turn, his reflection in the glass meeting the alien's gaze. "You've made quite an impression, Sergeant," the Zlekris said, its voice a mix of irritation and curiosity. "I aim to please," Callahan replied flatly. The Zlekris crossed its arms. "You've shown the galaxy that humans are dangerous, unpredictable. Do you think that's wise?" Callahan finally turned to face the diplomat. "I think it's honest. You all thought we were harmless, that our diplomacy was a sign of weakness. Now you know the truth. We prefer peace, but if you threaten what matters to us, We'll show you why we've survived every war we've fought. The Zlekris tilted its head, considering his words. Perhaps there is merit in that approach. But do not expect the galaxy to embrace it without resistance. Callahan smirked. We don't need the galaxy to embrace it. We just need them to remember it. A new reputation. Humanity's reputation in the galaxy shifted overnight. They were no longer seen as harmless newcomers, but as a species with the capacity for calculated violence and unyielding determination. Their adaptability, once seen as a curiosity, was now viewed as a dangerous strength. The Kroshal threat faded, their fleets avoiding Federation space. Trade stations and neutral zones grew safer, their operators quietly thankful for the brutal lesson humanity had taught the raiders. Sergeant Callahan returned to Earth, but his legacy lingered. Stories of the Marine who broke the Kroshal spread across the galaxy, a warning and a promise wrapped into one. The Federation, for all its debates and deliberations, came to an unspoken understanding: humanity was not to be underestimated. And the phrase war crimes became a chilling reminder that humans didn't just fight wars, they ended them.